All right, joining me now is Esfandiar Baraheni of SDPN Sports. He was very kind, very gracious with his time for this little project of mine. Esfandiar, thank you so much for hopping on, man. What are you excited most about this Toronto Raptors team right now?
Yeah, Ryan, thanks for having me. I think what I'm most excited about is hopefully a change in direction. I think ultimately this season is more about transition for the Raptors and potentially going into a new phase, a new head coach, a new rookie head coach. Obviously, Scottie Barnes is going to be getting a lot more usage and more responsibilities this season as well. So just in general, feels like a changing of the guard for the Raptors, and entering a new era always has its exciting moments.
Yeah, exciting's probably one way to put it, but I'm sure it's pretty stressful for sure for a lot of these fans, man.
Yeah.
You see a lot of these quotes coming out at media day. What's going on? What's going on with Pascal Siakam?
Yeah, look, I think there was some unnecessary reading into some of the quotes about Pascal, but some of the concerns are absolutely valid. The fact that, he hasn't necessarily gotten any type of contract extension yet. The fact that the Raptors and Pascal are seemingly at odds when it comes to a contract extension is definitely concerning, especially with him being an expiring contract. An all NBA player going into the final year of their season as an expiring contract is definitely something that's worrisome, right?
Sure.
So yeah, I completely agree. I think that's something that's definitely, it raises eyebrows, and I'm sure until we get some sort of resolution, whether that is a trade or an extension, it's going to continue to be a prevailing storyline this season for the Raptors.
Well, let's talk about the top then, because Pascal Siakam has been the best player on the team for a little bit here.
Yeah.
Obviously, going into the final year of his contract, whether that extension comes or not, that remains to be seen. We're recording this on October 4th, so maybe it happens over the next week or so. But
Right.
I do think that it's at least a little bit worrisome that you enter the final season of the deal without a contract. And given the timeline questions that I think plagued Fred VanVleet, that plagued the Scottie Barnes versus OG Anunoby versus Pascal Siakam kind of contingent right here, I think there's at least some questions as to whether Toronto really wants to bring him back and whether they think it's the best thing for the franchise. But you know this better than I. How has that pairing worked with Pascal and Scottie and OG?
I think those three together, in theory, actually work better than some people would conventionally think. The thing that has sort of thrown a wrench into this is adding Jakob Poeltl into this starting lineup, a guy who's a non-shooter, and now you're seeing the floor being congested more and more. And because Pascal and Scottie both sort of operate in similar areas of the floor, when you add a third domino in there in Jakob Poeltl, it makes it much harder for them to operate in the paint, much harder for them to get openings in the paint. They're constantly getting shadowed. They're constantly, sending two. There's double teams. I mean, Pascal Siakam consistently over the past, I would say 2 or 3 seasons, has been one of the most double team players in the league. Now, to be fair, he has grown considerably as a playmaker. He does a great job of manipulating defenses and, manipulating those double teams. But for the most part, it's become clunky because the Raptors haven't really optimized what a team around Pascal or even Scottie would look like, because they don't have tons of shooting. Their big man isn't a floor spacer by any means, and you need those types of guys in order to have a team around those two thrive. They just haven't been able to do that. And as far as, the quotes around what might happen with his extension, I think the more worrisome thing is, and a lot of people mentioned this on Media Day, the Raptors are looking to see if Pascal will become acclimated to the new rookie head coach in Darko Rajakovic and his style, his .5 offense style. But as we know, conventionally, most of the time, it's the coach that has to match the best player, not the other way around. So just by their messaging from that perspective, you can see, or you can hint at them potentially wanting to move on without actually saying that they want to move on.
That's tough because Scottie Barnes is a very talented young player who, rightly or wrongly, has been held out of a lot of these trade discussions that have been surrounding Toronto over the course of these past couple of years. You had the Kevin Durant saga. You had Damian Lillard over the course of these last couple of weeks. Do you think that Scottie's ready? Do you think that he's a guy who can step up into that larger role, maybe even handle some point guard duties with the loss of Fred VanVleet?
I don't think so. And that's just to be blatantly honest about it. I think like Scottie is a cerebral passer. I mean, you as a Nuggets person, you obviously know what a cerebral passer looks like in Nikola Jokic. I think there are some similar characteristics. I'm not going to say it's an apples to apples comparison because it is not, but there are some similar traits in terms of the playmaking, just being able to manipulate defenses, to find different crevices. The fact that he's able to sort of thread the needle on some of these passes is incredible. He's actually one of his best, playmaking performances actually came against the Nuggets. He was throwing full court passes. He was making plays out of double teams, et cetera, et cetera. Scottie is an incredible passer. Is he a point guard? Is he going to be able to manipulate pick and rolls? Is he a guy who's going to be able to create plays and, sort of be this sort of scoring threat out of pick and rolls? I do not think he's there yet. There are smarter people than me that have written about this already, but ultimately I think he's going to take a lot of bumps. He's going to have to go through a lot of hurdles in order to be a so-called point guard, if you will. Ideally, he's more of a post playmaking hub. He's like a Sabonis. He's a Bam Adebayo. He's something in that realm of things versus being the actual, point guard of a team.
I think that's fair, and that's part of the versatility that being 6'9" and having that kind of skill set will afford you. But it's also something that you've got to learn over time, and he is still a very young player, still a very inexperienced player in the grand scheme of things, and it's a lot to kind of figure out when you have maybe some moving parts around you. You lose Fred VanVleet, Dennis Schroeder steps in. Is he going to be the starting point guard, or are they going to go without a point guard in the lineup, do you think?
I would imagine they go without. I think Schroeder is a bit more of a change of pace guard that they can insert off of the bench. And just because Schroeder isn't necessarily a good shooter, it wouldn't make sense to start him and Scottie and all those guys together, especially with the logjam of Pascal Siakam and Jakob Poeltl in the front court. So you're mostly looking at a starting lineup of Jakob Poeltl, Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, Gary Trent Jr., and Scottie Barnes. And then that way you have OG and Gary Trent Jr. as these sort of floor spacers, shooters that can open things up for the other guys.
It's completely fair. I do think that it's going to make the bench even really interesting, just looking at the 10-man rotation. If you swap out Gary Trent, I had him as the 6th man before talking to you, but it looks like if Dennis Schroeder's going to be your 6th man, then you've got guys like Precious Achiuwa, Thaddeus Young, Chris Boucher. Yeah. Grady Dick is going to be potentially playing, but we'll see what happens. But it does feel like a lot of the same maybe issues as what happened with the team last year, where you've got a lot of guys that kind of fill that same role in that 6'8" to 6'9" power forward type. Yeah. And that extends to both the starters and the bench.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They're in desperate need of some roster balance, just depth and positionally. I think it makes sense for them to be, obviously that's why they're mentioned in all of these trade rumors, just because they do sort of need to balance out their roster a little bit. That's why Damian Lillard would have made so much sense, because he's a point guard, a pull-up shooting point guard, a creating point guard, and fitting him next to those guys would elevate the team in a major way. But ultimately, I think you're right. If you look at their front court off of the bench, you have Precious Achiuwa, you have Christian Koloko, you have Chris Boucher, Thad Young, even Otto Porter Jr. That's a logjam of guys who are going to be fighting for minutes, and how those minutes are divvied up is going to be a big issue. When it comes to Grady, I actually think he's going to have a larger role on this team than you'd think, just because of them being deprived as a shooting team. He was one of the best shooters coming out of college, and being able to kind of fill in roles just to be a spot-up guy is going to be huge for them, in my opinion.
I had him as the 10th man in the 10-man rotation, but I do think that there's a possibility he plays more than that. This team, like you said, it's just desperately in need of wings, desperately in need of shooting, and a guy that could really space the floor for the stars around him. All right, give me your ultimate predictions, because I think that this is it's going to be a problem with this team, because I could see them going a couple different ways. I have them winning 36 games this year. That is a problem, because last year they were 41-41. I don't think they got that much worse from a talent perspective, but I think that they also have some questions as to whether some of the stars are going to finish the season with the team. So it could either be 40-45 wins, or it could be 30 wins. So I'm curious to see where you're at.
Yeah, I sort of agree with that. I think, look, if the Raptors keep Pascal Siakam, if they keep him for the season, they obviously have their 2024 pick out the door to San Antonio. That's top six protected, so you don't necessarily want that to be too high of a pick to convey. So maybe they decide to be a little bit more competitive this year. Maybe they say, hey, we'll just ride it out with Siakam until the trade deadline. And at that point, I could see them being, a 39, 40, 41, 42 win team. I do think, though, they are honing in on development and they are going to potentially play more guys than they'd want to if they're trying to be a competitive team. I think Coach Darko Rajakovic has really mentioned development 1,000,001 times since he's been hired already. And he's going to focus on guys like Scottie, on guys like Precious Achiuwa, Grady Dick, Christian Koloko. And if those guys are getting more minutes and if they're seeing more responsibility, there's going to be nights where this team struggles, especially Scottie Barnes, who is going to be filling in to be this essentially this point guard for them. The fact that here, I'll put it to you like this. Fred VanVleet led the team in usage. He led the team in touches. And now that is gone, right? That gets divvied up between Gary Trent Jr. That gets divvied up between OG Anunoby and Scottie Barnes and et cetera and et cetera. How those guys are successfully going to tap into whatever potential they have in those minutes, in those touches, is going to be a big dictator of what happens here with this team. I would say, though, 36 37, something like that wins kind of makes sense for me. I have them just outside of the play-in race. But again, injuries, trades, etc. could obviously change that. But if we're looking at just this team moving forward, yeah, I think they're probably in that range.
An unfortunate kind of low point for a Raptors franchise that has just coming off of a title back in 2019 and has had several successful years.
Yep.
It's reaching a different era, I would guess, with building around Scottie Barnes. But I am very curious to see how it goes, just like you. And we're gonna find out together. Do you think, like, if you had to put a pin in it, do you think that OG or Pascal get dealt this year?
I would be very surprised if OG gets dealt. I think obviously his demand is more, there's more value out there for a guy who's obviously a little bit younger, 3-and-D guy, can fill into multiple roles. Like, yes, that's a more valuable thing right now, at least, until he gets that massive contract. But at the same time, I think Scottie and OG and Grady and Gary Trent Jr. sort of seem like the future of what this team looks like, just because you have Scottie, you have guys who can create off of him, you have guys who can shoot off of him as well, and it seems like Pascal Siakam is the guy that most likely won't be on this team next year. And when you look at that, now there would be only two guys from the 2019 championship team left remaining, and that would be Chris Boucher, unless he also gets dealt, and OG Anunoby. And yeah, I think that's probably what we're headed towards. I would be very surprised if OG Anunoby is dealt. I would not be surprised if Pascal Siakam is dealt. And I also wouldn't be surprised if that's before opening night. Like, that's how drastic this thing might be. Now we'll see. The Raptors have always been a patient team. The front office, as you can see from the not trading for Kevin Durant, not trading for Donovan Mitchell, not trading for Damian Lillard, they've always been a little bit hesitant with their stars to include them in trades or their franchise players. So it'll be interesting to see what the eventual return for Siakam is. But ultimately, Ryan, you were 100% right. It is a transition for this team. This season is a transition. They're entering a new era, a new coach, a new point guard, et cetera, et cetera. And you could imagine that they're going to take a bunch of bumps as they go through this new phase. So, yeah, that's what I would say. That's the final kind of prediction I have for them.
He is Esfandiar Baraheni of SDPN Sports. Thank you so much for hopping on. I wish you a good luck this season, and we'll talk soon, all right?
Appreciate you. Thank you. Go Blue Jays.